Hi and welcome back to my channel. This is Brian. This is Quest for Faith. Make sure you like, share, subscribe before we get started, and let's grow this channel. So today I'm going to be talking about why I chose to convert to Catholicism. And this wasn't an easy decision, and we're kind of going to walk through all those, what led me to where I'm at today. So please, again, like I said, like, share, subscribe, and let's get into this video. Have you ever had a question that completely changed your life? One that just burns in your mind and it has to be answered. And then when you answer it, you don't necessarily like what you found, but you keep following that thread. And really for me, better or worse, I am a truth seeker. I will always try and find the truth, find the real meaning, find the original. And perfect example, one of my favorite quotes is from Thomas Jefferson, and it's question with boldness even the existence of God, because if there be one, he must more approve of a homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear. And that always struck me when I learned that verse, especially for Thomas Jefferson to say that. And during that period of time, because everybody was Christians, there was no denial of God. There was a few, but not many. It wasn't as if it is today. And so, what was the question that completely changed my life and my direction in my faith? It simply was, why did we take out books of the Bible? And even more shocking for me was to find out that these books were, they were moved to the appendix by Martin Luther in the Reformation era, but they weren't completely removed until the 1800s. And that really, really bothered me. And so this question was a bother to me is just basically because how I was raised. I was raised Church of Christ. And Church of Christ is a very fundamentalist group. And they believe in sola scriptura. And so if it's not in the Bible, it's not Christianity. And they base everything they do in church off the New Testament. Even to the point where they don't use instruments in worship because there's no example of them singing with instruments in the New Testament. So they don't use instruments. And the Church of Christ, it started in the 1830s with this idea of worshiping God, going back to the basics of the New Testament. And the idea was to create unity within Christianity. And it didn't really work out that way when you look at the history of Church of Christ and the Campbell movement, but that was the initial thought. So, if all you need to do is have the Bible to figure out what you're doing, why would you start editing and taking books out of the Bible? I mean, it would be like, well, I don't like that verse, so I'm taking that out. And that's where my mind was going. And this question kind of sat in the back of my mind for about 5 years. And it really came down to another issue that came up and kind of slapped me in the face that I had to have answers for. Before I dive into this other issue that kind of slapped me in the face, I want to jump back a number of years to kind of just explain my faith journey overall. I grew up going to church 3 times a week at a minimum. We'd clean the church usually once a month. I was involved in a bunch of the youth group activities. Graduated high school, was a young life leader in college. Went to a Church of Christ school, Abilene Christian University. And it was just an interesting period of time, that high school and college age, being involved with Young Life, going away for the first time. All of that stuff kind of helped me see and start having these debates with other Christians that didn't grow up Church of Christ on the necessity of baptism, the importance of communion. And it started solidifying how I felt that Church of Christ was right in a lot of ways. But it also started pointing out glaring issues I found where I didn't think they were right. So when I went to ACU, I took all the required Bible classes. I think I took 12 hours of Bible. I got A's and B's on those. They weren't hard classes for me to study. But at that point, I wasn't necessarily taking my faith too seriously. I mean, I was spending more time probably chasing girls and just trying to get A's and B's to make my parents happy. And this issue started coming up that I had with the Bible students at ACU, where I felt like their attitude was that they were better than everybody else. And that's, looking back now, 20 years later, that probably wasn't it, but they were trying to live more holy lives than the rest of us college students. But I didn't like how they seemed to be looking down on us for drinking or partying. And so that was kind of the end of college. And I had this bitter taste in my mouth of Christians in general. And I felt like they weren't accepting of people's errors and trying and helping them move past it. It was more of just denouncing. And because to me, we're all sinners. We all fall short. And so there's no reason to really condemn somebody 100% on most sins. So 2003, I moved to Dallas, and I keep going to Church of Christ. And fast forward a few years, I've already met my wife. We've gotten married. She grew up Methodist, so she was attending Church of Christ with me at the time. We had our firstborn son, and at this point, I decided to go back and get my master's, and I wanted to get it at Abilene Christian University. My life was really difficult at this point. I had been laid off twice because of the mortgage collapse. I was trying to do a career switch and go into the education field. And so I felt like getting my master's at ACU would give me that opportunity to change paths career-wise. And so my wife supported me in this, and we moved back to Abilene. And while we were there, I just figured, this is the epicenter of Church of Christ for Texas. And it's going to be no problem finding a church. We'll be perfectly fine. And when we started looking, it didn't go that way. I felt like every church didn't have a good identity. There was the hardcore Church of Christ churches. There were these New Age type Church of Christ churches in Abilene. And I didn't really, my wife and I weren't fitting in anywhere, agreeing on it. And finally, after we were there for almost 2.5, 3 years, we started kind of looking at other denominations. But even those, nothing fit, right? I was looking for something that would just settle the issue for me. And so we weren't regularly going to church then. And then in 2011, we moved back to Dallas. And 2012 was probably the worst year of my life. We had so many issues going on. We were coming to terms with the fact that my oldest son probably had autism. My grandfather had died that year. At the same time, my wife had a miscarriage that was pretty bad. And that was a strain on our relationship. She blew her knee out too and had to have knee surgery that year. Everything was a struggle. There wasn't an easy thing, period, with life at this point. And I was just done. I felt I couldn't go to church anymore. And I remember having that conversation with my wife. It's 2012 and I'm 31, 32, and I'm done. Like I just couldn't do it anymore. But in the end, I couldn't turn my back on God. And I started trying to find another church. And we ended up landing at a Methodist church. And for me at this point in time, this is me just trying to patch back together my faith. Like I'm just grasping on to a lifeboat that seems sturdier than others. And I was looking for a church where my kid could get something out of it. My wife would enjoy it. I would enjoy it too. And this church fit the bill for us. And so we went there, and we'd go to church regularly, almost every Sunday. We didn't miss much. We weren't heavily involved in church there, but we would go all the time. And things were getting a little bit more difficult with my oldest at this point. And during this period of time, we had my youngest. And we were just so blessed to have him. And when having another kid put into focus the importance of my faith and raising my children to know God, and that I wanted this for them. I didn't want them to go through these struggles that I was going through as an adult. And so it was about this time that my youngest was born that I learned about the Protestant Bibles taking out these 7 books in the 1880s. Really starting in the 1820s, but officially it really stopped in the 1880s. And that just blew my mind. And it wasn't really until 2008, so 4 years later or so, that I started looking into it. And the reason I started looking into it is because I came to this conclusion that I could no longer continue to go to the Methodist Church. I had definitely had issues with how they did communion. They would do it once a month. Anybody could take communion. Didn't matter if you were baptized or not. I just felt that was completely wrong. But the nail in the coffin for me was that they had their annual meeting in 2018, and the Methodist Church voted not to have gay marriage and not to have gay priests. But all the Methodist churches in our area disagreed with that. And the Sunday following the annual meeting, our pastor stands up and gives this speech on how he thinks that gay marriage is biblical, and he's going to do a Bible study on it. And at that point, I just shook my head and said, nope, they've jumped the shark. This is too much. I can't do this. I have to find someplace else to go. And just my issues with gay marriage is, it's not that you love another person. It's condoning in the actual act of homosexuality. That's the sin. It's not the attraction. It's following on those urges. Just the same it would be for me following on urges to go hit on other women as a married man, right? Or have premarital sex. Same bucket. And really you look at what in Leviticus, the penalty for adultery and the penalty for homosexuality was death. Until Jesus came and died on the cross for us, and he gives us this opportunity to forgive us of our sins and try harder to have control, be set apart from the world. And so and to be honest, like I have family members that are homosexual and that are married, and I love them dearly. And honestly, like some of my children's best aunts are both gay, and they are unbelievable people. Obviously there's some issues politically and socially that we disagree on, but they're great people and I love them dearly. But I couldn't go to a church that was outright going against what the Bible said. I mean, it's just outright. You can't say something an act is detestable in Leviticus and you think that God changed his mind in the New Testament. Like, that's not happening. So we started looking around, and we'd already looked at all the mainline Protestant churches, and at this point most of them had already accepted gay marriage and were doing that, so we knew they were all out. I didn't want to go back to Church of Christ. I had my own issues with their theology and the history of the Church of Christ and what they were claiming and not claiming. And then we started looking at all the non-denominational churches, and everyone in our area was just overwhelmingly accepting of homosexual marriage. And I just felt that I was done. Like, again, I wanted to go. I wanted to be faithful. And so that's when I started saying, I have to look into this Bible issue. Because my thought when thinking about taking stuff out of the Bible, what if with this issue with gay marriage, the Protestant Bibles or the mainline Protestant Bibles start taking out verses in Leviticus or changing the language, and so that way it seems that it's wishy-washy, or that gay marriage is homosexual acts are not a sin. And I could see that happening in today's world. And it'd be really easy for them to take out a few verses and voila, Bob's your uncle. So I dove into it, and what I found I didn't agree with. I was looking into both the Jewish scriptures, and I was looking into how the Bible was created, and looking at the canons that were available for the Jewish people in Jesus's time, and that I found that most Jews used the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Bible, which is what the Catholic Church used for the Old Testament. And it all fell on its face for me. And the ultimate reason that I started to convert and open my mind up to joining the Catholic Church is in studying the first century church and reading letters and reading about what these men that were leaders right after the apostles had written, and to find hard evidence that the leaders in the first century church, we're talking even before 100 AD, believed in the real presence in the Eucharist. And then reading John 6 and going through that and studying that with the lens of, is he speaking in a metaphor here, or is he just literal? And coming to that conclusion that no, I completely think Jesus was being literal. Reading in John 6, reading in I believe it's 1 Corinthians, and seeing all these verses, and I couldn't go back from that. And so I had two choices. Three, really. I could just not go to church, which wasn't acceptable for me. I could join the Orthodox Church, or I could join the Catholic Church. Because those are the two options if you want the real presence. Those are the two faiths that do believe that. And I landed on the Catholic Church just from my research from the first century church and how the first century church interacted and with the bishops in Rome, and how they were an authority figure for all the churches. And so I went Catholic. And this wasn't an easy decision. This is a decision that's not only going to affect me, it affects my wife, it affects my children. It's going to affect my children's children and my great-grandkids and my great-great-grandkids, and hopefully moving forward for eternity. I knew that I was dealing with my family's salvation. And so we went to a Catholic church for the first time. I sat in Mass, and it was a beautiful experience. There wasn't anything special going on. I went to a Saturday afternoon Mass, and I just remember sitting in the back because I was nervous. I could have thrown up. And because I felt like this is I hope I like this because this is my only option. I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't like this. And it was great. I'd never felt more peace worshiping God in church than I did at that moment. Is my family happy with it? No, I don't think they are. The first time I ever heard anything Catholic or had an inkling of what Catholicism was, I think I was 5 or 6, and I was watching Notre Dame play football, and I said, as little boys do, I want to play for Notre Dame. And my Nana speaks up from sitting on the couch and says, you can't play for them, they're Catholics. So I had no idea what that meant, but to me it meant Catholics are bad, so I can't play there. And I remember being nervous that my sister was friends with a Catholic girl, and she spent the night on a Saturday night and went to Mass the next morning with her. And I remember kind of being upset about it. And because this is just my upbringing. So the idea that now in my late 30s, and I'm 40 now, that I'm going to go through this spiritual crisis and convert to Catholicism is a big deal. But ultimately, the whole reason I converted is Jesus and the Eucharist and the chance to actually consume the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And I couldn't be happier with my choice. This hasn't been an easy journey. It was a lot of research, and I have a bunch of videos on this channel that you guys can watch where I'm kind of giving brief overviews of the research I did to get to where I'm at. But I thank God every day that I found the Catholic Church. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you had a great time listening to my story. Please comment below if you have any questions. I'd love to interact with you all in the comments. But thank you very much. Have a great day. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this video. Talk to you all later.